All right, everybody, I'm going to spotlight Mary and I'm going to give you a little backstory on her. Mary is, she already told us, but she lives in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. She has an online store. She sells on Craftsy and Etsy and also at quilt shows in the area. You can find her patterns also at some local quilt shops. She's very creatively driven. Her designs are fueled by her past. Growing up in a rural farm community gave her a love of nature and animals. As you will see from her designs, her great love for children's artwork is also evident in her wonky animals. And she is an avid pickleball player. Yep.
Yeah, all 100 pounds of me. Am I on?
You're on, girl. It's all you.
Okay. Mary Hurdle, as you heard, from Oshkosh, Wisconsin. This is my Nomer. I'm assuming you're getting this. Mine looks backwards, but I'm sure you're getting this. Made by Marney is my handle. Marney is my nickname. I didn't want to start with a business called Made by Mary, although Mary is actually my first name because it's such a common name. And I thought, Googling might be easier with Marney, a little different. I'm so glad I did because at the time I had no idea where this all was going to go with the paper piecing designing. And I exclusively design paper piecing. It's my thing. I started to do it after 35 years of teaching art in Kaukauna, Wisconsin. I taught elementary school. And when I retired at the age of 55, I was just missing having that, coming up with a new project all the time for the students and doing all the little sketching and things that I would do for them. Not for them, but for the projects, for the samples. And so starting this, because I've always loved sewing and I've always loved sketching, was just a wonderful niche for me. And at the time, this was in 2013, there wasn't a whole lot as far as paper piecing patterns. There's a lot more now. And it's so much fun now shopping around for patterns. They're everywhere, Pinterest and Etsy. You mentioned Etsy, that I'm on Etsy and Craftsy. Actually, Craftsy is kind of, they don't have our patterns anymore. They just a teeny few. And so it's basically Etsy that I sell at. And then I have distributors that sell my patterns throughout the US. And then I also am working on book number 6 right now through C&T Publishing. So I'm getting out there. Now, what I'm talking about mostly today, I got to promote my gnomies, because the gnomes, as you can see behind me, I have a tree skirt full of 8 gnomes. I'll flip down a little bit. You can see the whole tree skirt here. It could also work as a table topper if you didn't put the hole in the middle. And I have developed that pattern, which will be available. It is on Etsy right now, and you can find a link for this after the video. But the gnomes are the hottest item on my store at the time. I have started out with just a few, and then a lot of customers would email me and say, well, how about a gnome with a tree? How about a gnome with a lantern? And it's whenever I hear that customers are interested in something, I hop on it, because I know if 1 or 2 of you like it, probably a whole lot of people will like it. Right now I have 50, yes, 50 different gnomes. They're all in here filed away, all available on Etsy, and I'll have customers that will buy all 50 if they can afford it at one time. So this pattern has 8 gnomes in it. So, with that pattern, you get all 8, but I'm developing other things for Christmas, like this adorable little stocking. This will be online soon. Any of the gnomes fit, because my patterns are almost always 8 by 8 unfinished. So they fit on one piece of print paper, and you can print it all at home. So I've got a couple different gnomes on these stockings. Very, very easy patterns. I'm also doing some little mug rugs. That would be fun for the patterns. Gnomes on little gift bags. Here's the reindeer gnome. He looks great on there. So those are all patterns I'm developing right now. The tree skirt's available right now in pattern form, but these are coming. And I have shops that are doing like 12 gnomes. They're doing gnome of the month. For instance, the Paisley Duck in Kelso, Washington, state of Washington, are doing gnome of the month. And I do have plenty to choose from. So you could have like 3 different choices for July, whatever. And then they're doing those 12. And now they just contacted me and they want to put it all into a quilt, all 12 blocks. And so they asked if I would design a center for that quilt. And that's what I'm working on right now. And I thought you might be a little interested in how I go about designing when I do my paper piece designs. So basically, I like to sketch small. So I start out by just doing a small, like a 3x3 sketch of whatever I want to make. And it's always a square, so that will then easily expand into later my 8x8 block. And so here is what, for instance, I wanted to design. I wanted to design a baking gnome, and this was at the request of a customer. So first I did my little sketch, and then I blow that sketch up. I don't know if you can see that with the light there. There, that's better. I blow that up into my computer. So everything really starts hand done and basically ends hand done. But I do use my computer to get things the right size, because I'll have my template exactly the size I want it. Then from there, I do a colored version of it. And this is all hand colored. I had one customer who sent me a little comment about one of my patterns. And she said, it looks kind of like it's from a coloring book page. It doesn't look like other patterns I get. And that's because it is hand colored like a coloring book page. I have a variety of pencil colors I use. It's all hand colored. I don't use EQ for anything. I do this all by hand, and then I use what I need from Word on my computer to get everything marked, because once it's colored, I'll scan it into my computer, and then I add, you know, the lines that separate the different spaces. So my patterns don't come to you all separated with seam allowances on them. They come as a finished picture image, because I think, well, for one, it all fits, then your pattern all fits on one page. And I think it makes more sense to you as you put the pattern together, because you're going to be doing this in sections. And if you see what it looks like finished as an image, it just makes more sense. So here in this little picture, you can see how the pattern has to be cut apart to then sew the segments together to get that finished image. And you always get a picture of what it looks like in the corner too when it's all done. Some of the tools I love that 1/4 inch ruler, the add a quarter ruler, which has a little groove in it. I'm always using a seam ripper. That's a must. And I love, for designing this cool board, this is actually a light box. It's a digital light box. It has, you know, a little plug in, and it'll light up. So then, for instance, if I want this same gnome in another pattern, I can just lay them on top of each other and trace it to get that same image again. And I can do it on my lap. I can do it when I'm sitting in my easy chair. It's such a great, and that light box maybe cost about $12 on Amazon. So they're out there. You don't really need a link for it because they're everywhere, but you can get them very reasonably if that's your thing. So how about a quick tip, my tip of the day on paper piecing. This is just a very common sense tip. And if you paper piece a lot, you probably already know it, figured it out on your own. But basically, when you're doing a segment, like right now, part of that center of that quilt I'm making for the Washington shop, I'm going to do this gnome with a mushroom. Okay, so he's in development right now. I don't even have him done in fabric yet. This is my first attempt. This is section C. So for paper piecing, of course, you're going to pin piece 1, the fabric for piece 1 behind the pattern, and the good side of the fabric is facing away from the back of the pattern. And you're going to be sewing right through the paper. So now between piece 1 and 2, I'm going to fold on that line because that's going to be a seam line. And then I trim my fabric to 1/4 inch. So now I have to line this up on the fabric I want for piece 2, which is a green. So as I'm laying this piece in place, I have, whoopsie, it should be this one. This is piece 2. I'm sorry. I folded it here. This is piece 2. I have sketched the back of piece 2. So you can see piece 2. And as I lay this on my fabric, all I have to do is put the right sides of the fabric together and line up a seam with any straight edge of my fabric. And then you can see exactly where that piece is on the back, because I made it a little darker, you can see it, but you can see through the paper too when you're doing it in person. And now if there's fabric behind this piece now, after I sew my seam, there will also be fabric behind the piece where it should be. I don't pre-cut pieces. I don't cut like 2x3 pieces because most of my patterns, every block is different on the pattern. You're going to be using scraps. And to try to cut the shape first is just too much time consumed. It's too confusing. I use bigger chunks of scraps, sew my piece on, flip it, iron it, and then cut off what I don't need. So here, if I'm placing it here and there's fabric all the way around it, I know that's a good placement. But if I were to put it, for instance, here, half of that shape now is off the top of this green scrap. That's not a good place. I'm going to be seam ripping if I sew it there. So I find a good place to put it. I open it up. I don't pin anything. I sew on the seam. And then after that, I flip the green fabric in place and trim off. So this one's already been sewn. This is another segment from that same. I'm doing piece, this is number 5. I have it folded. I lined it up, open it, sew it. Then I press the fabric in place. And then I will trim off what I don't need. And I'm always a little more generous so that at the end, when you square up your block, you have a little more fabric to work with. Because if your image ends up being a teeny bit smaller, it's not going to matter. It's the outside dimension you want to make sure is going to end up 8x8 unfinished if you're sewing it into a specific pattern afterwards. So it will fit into your pieces. Okay, so that's a little fun tip on paper piecing. Now, this is my latest book. This is Paper Piecing All Year Round, and it has 2 gnomes in it. And this one, the flower gnome and the fishing gnome, you can only get in the book. But this is a great book, just came out this year. It's got 24 different, 2 for each month of the year, different blocks in it. And you can have a lot of fun making the 7 different designs that they all fit into. Everything's interchangeable, but they also fit in all my other books because the blocks are always the same size. So you can use this in a tree skirt from the Christmas book and so on. Okay, so paper piecing all year round, check it out. That's also on my books are all on my Etsy shop. And actually I just saw this at Joann's the other day. So they carry it around the nation. So I think that concludes today's chat. Are there any questions from you about paper piecing?
Mary, I have a question. So I'm happy to see it's not just gnomes. I love gnomes, but you love gnomes and animals.
Oh yeah, I've got everything, flowers, vehicles, lots of different animals. I do requests if you email me and say, would you paper piece a safety pin pattern for me? I've done that. And I don't charge for designing because I pick and choose which designs I want to do. If it's something I don't think is really going to work well in paper piecing, I will say, I think you might be better off applicating that shape or that image. But I'm glad to do designing for people because like I said, if one person likes it, I'll put it on my Etsy shop. Other people will follow and they will buy it as well. So that's where I will, eventually make some money off the pattern. I just like getting your ideas, and your ideas have taken me to some of my best selling items.
Becky wanted to know if you have a sewing gnome with a needle and thread.
Ah, the reason I don't right now is because I'm not going to do a needle. It's really hard to do a needle in paper basing. Really, I could work on that. I could have it holding something other than a needle, maybe.
A thimble?
Yeah, a thimble. We've talked about it. We could always do the thread. Like I like to add embroidery sometimes, just straight stitching to add details that are too tiny to, like his little skates are done. The skate blade is done with just stitching with black embroidery floss. So that's good. Email that to me and that'll be my little reminder to work on a sewing gnome.
Do you have other crafty ones, like a knitting one or anything like that?
I don't think I have a knitting one either, which is crazy because I knit, but boy, I've got them doing just about everything right now, but I'm open to suggestions. So just email me those suggestions and I'll get on it.
I was right along the line with Elizabeth. And so if I see that you have a lot of gnomes, but so what is your second favorite? I'm assuming
Animals.
So.
I have about 70 different breeds of dogs and a lot of cats, and the dogs are hot. I have a number of different patterns that have dogs in them that are on Etsy, and the dogs are out of this world popular and everyone wants their breed in the quilt. So there'll be like 11 blocks that are included in the quilt pattern, but then people want to get that extra Doberman to put in, or Chinese crested, or I mean, I've done patterns of breeds I have never heard of, and it's been very enlightening and interesting along the way. But I don't like.
They have more characters too. Like they've got a character within themselves. So to portray that in a paper piece is a little tricky than just getting the size and shape right. Yeah.
Yep, and I like it if the customer can send me a picture, a photo of their actual animal, and then I can try to get some of that coloring in my sample, which of course you can use whatever fabrics you want to make it look more like your dog, but it always seems to help. A lot of people can't picture it on their own. They like to see it. And that's my second thing. I get a lot of people requesting kits because I have an art background. I'm pretty good with color coordinating, color matching. And they want to know, do I have kits? And I am not a fabric shop, nor do I want to be. I just want to do the designing. So no, I don't do any kits.
Now, since you do so much paper piecing, what is your favorite stitch length for it? And what's your favorite paper?
Favorite paper is the cheapest paper I can find, which I usually get from Staples, and I'll go through, I go through reams of it because I'm always designing. It's just something thin, so it's easy to rip. I use a 1.5 stitch, which is about 20 stitches per inch. And I can computer that into my memory on my machine, so I don't always have to be changing the knob. And then I just, can hit that little heart and my stitch comes up 1.5.
And what about for thread? Are you using 50 weight, 40 weight?
Yeah, I'll use the typical, I use a lot of Gutermann, and it's the same thing I would use for piecing or sewing quilts. Same thing with stippling. I just always use about the same thing. I would like to try Aurifil. I just haven't gotten there because I have such a good collection of colors right now through Gutermann that, when you start over with a new brand, you're starting over with all those colors and it can get a lot of thread and a lot of cost. So right now I'm sticking with my Gutermann, but I've heard wonderful things about Aurifil, especially for stippling.
Okay.
I do all my own stippling. I think anybody can learn stippling on their domestic machine. They just have to spend a summer doing it.
You can drive, you can stipple. Yes, I agree. Oh, what's your machine? What do you own for a machine?
I have a Bernina. I have 2 Berninas. I love my Berninas, but I've sewn on other machines too I grew up on a Kenmore. I'm into, I know it so well now that I'm kind of with the Bernina.
So you've had 6 books out. Do you have another one in the works?
Yes. And I think we can talk about it. It's close enough. It will be coming out in 2022. It will be all baby animals. And they will be all in, the projects are all going to be things for nursery, you know, baby quilts, bibs, burp cloths, things you would use in a nursery or for your baby, a diaper bag, tote bag. Yeah. So that's exciting coming out. And I usually work on one book a year. As soon as I finish one, I say I'm not doing another. And then in a month, I'm like, I need a project, especially with COVID. I need a project. I'm gonna start another book. And I like to ask my publishers now at this point with 6 books, what are customers looking for? And I'll do it.
Okay,
it's-
so
it's
the
good to
hot
have
thing was
person.
babies.
Well, that hot thing was baby animals. That's
Oh.
what customers were looking for. The thing with a book is it takes 17 months from idea to finished book, or basically signing your contract to finished book. So by the time, you know, you start with this idea, it's hot, you hope it's still hot a year and a half later when the book comes out. I haven't found that to be a problem at this point. So it usually is. The problem is the fabrics, because I can use this fabric in a sample in my book, and then a year and a half later, everyone wants to know, where'd you get that fabric? And well, good luck. You're probably not going to get it at this point if you got it at a fabric store. But
Good point.
that can be a problem.
So is your home filled with gnome quilts? And
My home is filled with quilts, period. Everything I have. If I go and do a lecture, and I do that, you can contact me if you want me to come lecture for your guild. I love to lecture for guilds. I will bring about 40 to 50 items with me to show. So of course I have to keep samples of everything I've made. And because I don't have an EQ and I don't just design it on computer and then, you know, print it as a pattern, I actually always make a finished quilt. So I have something to photograph for the cover. And then I have all these samples and samples and samples that are in every closet. As a matter of fact, I had overnight guests this past week, and my sister came over and she said, where can I hang my clothes in the closet so it doesn't get wrinkled? I said, good luck, because every closet you open, it smells of quilts.
are they all, they're not all big quilts though. Are they all big?
No, I don't do usually anything bigger than a lap. And I do lots of smaller items. And I love to design for magazines. I've been in about 30 different magazine articles right now. You know, like quilting, all the Fons and Porter quilt magazines, and Love of Quilting, and Quilt Maker. And I've been in all of those a number of times. And I like to design small projects for them because, you know, you have to make the sample and then they have to photograph it. And there isn't a whole lot of time from when they request the idea to when they want the finished sample. So if I do smaller things, I can keep up a lot better.
So I know you have a ton of patterns, but what's been like your top sellers?
Top sellers would be the jog patterns, jogs only, cats and dogs. It has 6 cats and 6 dogs together. And then like things that dinosaur quilt for kids' room, a lot of juvenile, because I think that because I was an elementary art teacher, I tend to design more on the whimsical side. And that just really relates itself really well to children and babies. So that's probably, yeah, top seller, the
What
dogs.
about for gnome? What's the most popular gnome?
The gnome is upside down right now, but this guy's very popular, holding the tree. He's the lumberjack gnome. The heart gnome, I did it for Valentine's Day. It's a gnome holding a little heart. That one is selling every day, you know, couple. So yeah, probably those 2.
All right, nice. And you've been doing this for, I know you said.
Since 2013.
Okay.
After I retired, I said to myself, because I had like 650 students a week, and I went to 3 schools at some years, and it was a lot of organizing and a lot of moving around, and I was exhausted. It's a lot. And so when I retired, I said, I'm just taking a whole year off. Well, within a month, I had a job at a fabric store, of course, can't sit still. And so when I started working there, I just naturally started to design because I wasn't finding what I wanted. the images I wanted. At that time, a lot of the paper piecing was tiny, tiny, tiny. And as I looked into discussions on paper piecing, they would always say, it's such a great way to do an image because you can get all these tiny little details. Well, I'm thinking, why isn't it also a great way to make something bigger and get details in that as well? But you're just going to end up with a bigger project. Because for me to spend like maybe, you know, half an hour paper piecing an image and you come up with something this big and you want to make a quilt, that's not going to happen. But if you have bigger pieces, it's just going to go so much faster. And it's going to seem like that time is really well spent. So I right away went to a bigger block size.
All right, excellent. Does anyone else have any questions?
I'm trying to think. Oh, I was going to ask what's your next project, but you were talking about a book that was coming out. So do you have
Yeah.
something else beyond the book? Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the process of editing the book right now. So I work with about 5 different editors from C&T. And, you know, one editor will do everything with the math part of it. Do you have the right yardage? Does this figure correctly that you're saying you're going to use this block with this size sashing? Is that all correct? So we have to go all through that with a fine tooth comb. Another editor will work on like the pictures, the images, the drawings. Another editor will work with, you know, getting a good cover and something consistent in the pages. So it kind of works with my other books as well. So there's a whole bunch of different, and I email everybody everything because of course we're all working on computer with each other. We're in different states. And then I have to get all my samples out to them. So doing a book it's a lot of work. And I mean, you're starting from scratch. You're not just writing a story or like a novel. I'm not saying that's not a lot of work too, but you've got to come up with the ideas. You've got to get all the images done, get all the patterns done, get all the samples done, draw all the patterns, and then get it all together into a cohesive book. So it's a lot. And they're about 60, 65 pages long. So it's not a pamphlet, it's a book. But the next thing is just always continuing. Like I wanted to really start to do some more videos. And of course, I am not the techie genius that I wish I was. And so I live alone. I can't really have somebody filming me. And it's not cost efficient to hire someone to do all that filming and editing. I would want to do it myself. But I'd like to do a whole series of videos that I could put out there. It's just, I feel limited because I don't know that much about editing software for videos at this point.
Okay.
It's a learning curve, but that's what I'd like to work on.
Your stuff's
Yeah.
amazing. I just looked at your Etsy site. It's amazing.
I have about 400 patterns right now.
It's prolific.
Something for everything. Yeah.
You can get lost on it. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Mary, what is your favorite part of the design process? Is it
Easy.
finishing, drawing? Is it the design? Yeah, what is it?
Sketching. It's because I go back to my art roots. I like to just sit in my easy chair, put a movie on that I don't, usually a movie I've seen before, so I don't have to think too hard about the movie, and I'll just sketch and come up with different sketches. And usually I can tell if a sketch is going to make a good block. And sometimes I have to do it out of fabric before I can actually see the problems with it, because it has to be in color, and then everything is kind of glaring if there's something wrong. But then secondly would be doing it the first time in fabric, just pounding out the pieces so I can see what it looks like finished. And that's my favorite. Yeah.
Nice.
It's not writing the pattern on the computer.
Mm.
That is not my favorite thing to do. Or writing a book is not, but coming up with all the things for in the book. And I do like to design in like a theme. So it's fun for me to do a book because then everything can kind of go with that theme. I
can see where the book would be nicer too, because you just said there's somebody that helps edit like fabric, you know, and edit the technical stuff. So yeah,
Yes.
I can see the benefits of doing that and not being rely upon yourself for the whole process. So
Becky, I have learned so much from those editors about writing patterns,
yeah.
and it's been amazing.
Is
how
your
smart
sixth
they
book a lot easier to write than your first?
Oh, yes. The
Yeah.
first book I did, I actually did 2 books in the same year, because when I went to market to try to get a publisher, I took 2 different book ideas with me. I basically had the books almost written already and all the samples done and everything. And I was wheeling down my little suitcase to these different publishers, and they took both of them, both books. And then I was like, oh my God, I have to do not just one book, but 2 at once, because they'll, you know, put a deadline on things and it's got to be done by that time. But it did teach me a lot. And that year was overwhelmingly a lot. But now, yes, because my books all kind of are formatted the same, I can, like, especially like the how-to section, it's just very easy, because it's always, you know, this is how you paper piece. Once you have that down, I have changed things a little bit along the way, but yeah.
Monica has a question.
Yes,
Monica?
so I have just started getting into hardcore coloring. So I wanted to know what were your favorite pencils to sketch with and which pencils you like to color with.
Well, for sketching, I can just use a number 2. I'm not really shading things in or anything. So a number 2 is fine. For coloring, I use barrel colored pencils, just because that's what I had that I was using for drawings. I always did like to use colored pencil anyway as a medium. And I had a lot of different shades in that. So I stick with a barrel. And yeah, that's about it as far as coloring. But I mean, you know, the Quilt E people, I don't know exactly how the paper piecing software works, but I think they basically have to put their vector lines in like you would with Illustrator, and then spaces just fill in with a nice matte color. It looks very, well, like these are all, they take my patterns for the book and they actually have an illustrator that does everything. So it's very, very professional. So these are all done as, you know, they would come off of an EQ. But for my own individual patterns, I do it all on my own.
Nice. Nice. Well, if nobody else has a question, we'll say thank you to Mary. We can hang around and talk for a little bit. Mary, we can free you to draw more things.
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you so much.
Working on something right now, so I'll go back to sewing.
Thanks, Mary. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure.